My name is Casey Burkholder, and I'm a doctoral candidate in the Department of Integrated Studies in Education. And today I'm going to talk about some of my research on Cellphilms, participatory visual methods, and economically marginalized non-Chinese speaking youth. First, what is the participatory research project that I'm working on? So I work with young people in Hong Kong, and they're my former secondary students, which makes me feel incredibly old. So I taught these people when they were 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and now they are 19 to 25. And the project that I'm doing works with these youth to identify how their process of being in school influence the way they see themselves as adults. So what's their sense of identity? How do they feel that they belong? How do they act as citizens in Hong Kong? Now, my participants were non-Chinese, as I mentioned earlier. Basically, this means any person who is not ethnically Chinese. In the school that I worked, it was participants, or at that time they were my students. They were ethnic minorities, generally from South Asia. So my participants come originally from the Philippines, Pakistan, Nepal, India, Thailand. And those are sorts of the folks that I'm working with. I've been working with them first as their teacher. Then 2 years later, I did my master's degree at Concordia University. In that project, I worked with the same participants, my former students, and I investigated how the government set out particular policies to include these students in schools and what their lived experiences were of going to school. I found that a lot of the policies that the government set out were not particularly useful for the students, and that in fact their lived experiences showed that they felt quite segregated and quite separate from the local Chinese population. So that work was qualitative in nature, meaning I asked people questions, we had interviews, semi-structured interviews, and then I found the results of that research and I put them into an academic article, I put it into my thesis, and the project was finished. But I felt completely dissatisfied. I felt dissatisfied because I wasn't able to make a difference in the population within which I worked. Also, academic conferences, academic journal articles, and theses are not particularly useful for my participants. They're not spaces where they normally engage. So for my doctoral work, I decided to work again with the same people, sort of encountering the questions of belonging and self and identity, as well as citizenship. But we decided to create short films called Cellphilms. They're Cellphilms because we shoot them on cell phones. And I worked with the participants to come up with questions, to brainstorm ideas, to film the films, then later to disseminate them on YouTube. And we took this participatory approach because we wanted to influence different communities. Of course, I'm still writing in academic journals. Of course, I'm still writing my dissertation. But the more important thing for this project is that I'm able to influence the communities within which I work. That's sort of the participatory ethos from the beginning of the project, which comes from a few productive failures along the way. So my next question is, why did I employ a participatory approach? And the reason that I did employ a participatory approach in my work is to sort of address, I would say, a gap to my previous research. And the gap was that the work was not able to be communicated in such a way that my participants could, in such a way that they could engage with in their real lives, in their everyday lives. And so in order to make social change, which is one of the goals of participatory research and certainly one of the goals of my project, which would be to have a larger conversation around ethnic minority youth, their rights in school, how they see that, how they feel that they belong, and how they can actually be included in a real way in schools, that for me necessitated a participatory approach. So creating a research project that simply focused on getting answers to a particular question, that wasn't worth it for this particular project for me. My third question, how did the process of partnering with your stakeholders look for you? So my relationship with my participants shifted over time. In the beginning, as I was their teacher, it was very much I had the power and they were, they had to listen to me, they had to be good, they had to be, do their homework and stuff. And then later on, when we worked together as collaborators on this research project, I had to learn that, in my role as a researcher and facilitator, the project didn't go the way that I wanted it to go. So here's what I'm talking about. In the project, I asked my participants to create cell films. That's cell phone videos. That's films made on a cell phone. And in these cell films, I asked them to take on 3 questions. I asked them to create one cell film about the following question: who am I in Hong Kong? I asked them to make a second cell film about where do I belong in Hong Kong? And I asked them to do a third cell film about the question, how do I participate as a citizen in Hong Kong? Now, my participants are 19, 20, 21, like I said. Some of them are in college. All of them work. So being a part of my research was something that they did on the side. They did it because they were interested in the project, or they did it because of our previous relationship. But the project didn't go as I wanted to. In my mind, as a researcher, I thought, okay, I'm arriving in January. The films will be shot in February. We'll have a screening in March. The project will be able to be wrapped up, and we can think about disseminating disseminating the products over time. Here's what really happened. I arrived in January. I didn't meet with participants until February because they were all so busy. Then we ended up having multiple workshops. So I had a cell film workshop with 4 participants. Then I had individual cell film workshops with individual participants. So instead of having the project be one group creating multiple cell films, I had a number of groups and a number of cell films, and some participants took on all 3 questions in one cell film. One participant took on all 3 questions, and other participants created one film or didn't create a film. So the process of partnering in participatory research requires a degree of researcher, hands-off. Like, you have to be a bit hands-off in the process, and you have to also be amenable to the ways in which your participants want to participate. So it's a little bit different. What are the benefits of employing a participatory approach? I'd say one of the main benefits for me of employing a participatory approach is that I feel more confident that I am creating work with participants to speak to their own communities in their own voices. That's very different than the previous qualitative work that I did, in that I took the information from participants and I showed it to other audiences. So to me, this is a main critique of the project. A benefit that a lot of people talk about in participatory research is the idea that you create democratizing spaces because you're doing participatory research. The researcher doesn't have the same sort of powerful role, and the participants somehow feel more equal to the researcher. But I don't know if that's really the case in my work. I think that ideally this space is democratized, but the fact is that in my cell film project, I'm working in the socio-political situation of Hong Kong. It has a very specific political circumstance. The space outside of the research is not democratic. And so what does it mean as a Western researcher to come into a community and say, okay, now we're creating democracy in this classroom or in this space, and then we're sharing these products in a lot of different spaces, which is also in a way democratic. But, I really wonder if that's a claim that we can make. And that's something that I'm continuing to think about in relation to the participatory literature, this idea about democracy. Does it really create democratic spaces? I don't know. Can I describe a challenge that I encountered? Absolutely. So I had a workshop with 3 male participants, a cell film workshop. In this workshop, we went through brainstorming. We brainstormed those 3 questions I mentioned before. Who am I in Hong Kong? Where do I belong? And how do I participate as a citizen? They decided to make collaborative cell films, so the 3 would work together on the 3 cell films. They created storyboards. They had a lot of different ideas, but decided ultimately that they'd rather film outside of the research space. Now, month 1 went by, month 2 went by, month 3. They didn't end up making a cell film. So I would say in participatory research, you have to be really amenable to the ways in which your participants want to participate and to the extent that they will participate, because people have real lives outside of the research space. Even though I, as a graduate student, maybe do not have a life outside of the research space, my participants definitely do. So I think being amenable and, being aware of the kinds of real lives that participants bring to the research is really important too. So it was a challenge. I was disappointed, but then to me, that's also a finding in the project that, not everyone can participate, or not everyone is willing to participate in the way that I am asking them to participate. Did a participatory approach impact knowledge translation or sharing the result or impacting change? So in my work with my participants, we created an archive of our Cellphilms on YouTube. We decided to create a single archive, which is a single email address. It's called We Are Hong Kong 2, or WEAREHKTOO. And the reason in which we did this is so that we could put all the Cellphilms together and there would be a kind of anonymity to the project. In that even though there are different participants who created the Cellphilms, it's difficult to know who created each one because they're coming from a central source. And it did impact a couple of things. For one, another project in Hong Kong also took up a similar approach to creating videos with participants, and they created a similar archive, which I see as a real change in terms of the ways in which this kind of topic is discussed. Another thing is that a lot of times in Hong Kong, ethnic minorities are discussed in the media through sort of essentialized terms, like all ethnic minorities are X, or ethnic minorities are failing to do Y. So these sorts of Cellphilms really spoke back to those media discourses and created youth, they allowed for youth to speak back to those particular kinds of discourses. But I would say, has it impacted change? The Cellphilms have been viewed over 1,100 times in the last year. I think that that's really exciting. It's been shared across social media. It's been shared by particular nonprofits in the area. I find that really exciting. But has it impacted systemic change at the at the Educational Bureau level in Hong Kong? No, not yet. But because the films remain online until the participants decide to remove them, I think it's pretty exciting, and that there is the opportunity for, the right policymaker to see them, and maybe change will happen. I also think that it creates conversation in the communities themselves and acting together as citizens. I think that's the way that real change happens. I don't think it comes from a Western researcher coming in and saying, let's make change, we need change. I think it comes from the participants themselves. And again, that's really fostered by participatory video and participatory visual approaches. Any words of advice for graduate students thinking of participatory research? I think that like any research project that you have to think about the questions that you're coming up with. What is it that you want to know? How do you view your participants? And where do you want to make change in terms of knowledge translation later on? So you have to think for yourself about the goals of your research and then sort of choose your method from there. Of course, I'm biased and I think participatory research is the best. And the reason I do so is, I come from an education background, and I think that any time that you give participants or students the opportunity to create research with individuals, I think that it gives them a lot more sort of ownership over the project. That it's no longer just yours as the researcher, but it also belongs to the people with whom you research. And to me, that's really important work. Thank you very much for listening to me as I spoke about my project and talked about how much I love participatory video, participatory visual research, and Cellphilms in particular. Thank you.